Thank you so much for staying tuned. As we promised, tonight we'll be looking on matters education. The Cabinet Secretary for Education, Professor George Magoha, hinted that schools might be reopened in November this year. We are having an education expert, Ms. Mutheu Kasanga, who is the national chairperson of the Kenya Private School Association, which is the umbrella body of the private basic education institution. She's also an education sector board chair for the Kenya Private Sector Alliance. Welcome, Ms. Mutheu.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. On Sunday, we had Professor George Magoha, who is the education boss, hinting that schools might reopen in November. Do you think it is time for school to reopen at this particular time, as it is with the status quo?
The Cabinet Secretary has been very clear all along from the time the education sector was closed. Whenever he spoke, he has always said, depending on the trajectory that the pandemic takes, that education will reopen when it is safe for children to go back to school. He has said that categorically. And he has emphasized that there had been nothing set in stone all along. Mm-hmm. So given what is happening now, given that we are all now seeing a stabilization on the part of the trajectory of the pandemic, I am sure that in conjunction with the Ministry of Health, because this for once is not a decision that the Ministry of Education can take unilaterally. This is a decision that has to be taken in conjunction with the Ministry of Health, that perhaps now we can really begin to plan for the reopening of education.
Mm-hmm. All right, yes. Looking at the way schools are being prepared, they had of course hinted that the higher learning institution, the varsities will reopen due to some of the courses are not really based on a face-to-face, mode of learning. But there has been a slow progress in terms of implementing some of these measures that have been put in place by the Ministry of Health, and therefore raising the concern that the preparation is quite slow. Do you think, as it is, we are not ready in terms of infrastructure?
On the contrary, I wish to perhaps draw your attention to the fact that so much is happening on the ground. Let me start at university level. First and foremost, a good number of universities have managed to mount the vast majority of their courses online. This happened last semester with May semester. For universities, it is May semester, and this September we have seen all first years, the vast majority of first years onboarding for their studies on online platforms. I know the question that then comes next is, what about the courses that are practical? All those practical courses have elements of theory that we have agreed as stakeholders is what we need to jumpstart and get going, so that number one, we can get learning continuing even as the sector is closed. Learning continues. Mm-hmm. On TVET, this is where we have a big challenge. Both on the government and on the private side. But so far, efforts are going on well. A lot of the courses that can be mounted online are in the process of being mounted. First years are being onboarded online. And we are trying very hard to make sure that whatever course that is being offered and the costs are affiliated to going online, we are working with other private sector players. For instance, we are working with Safaricom, we are working with Jamii Telecom, we are working with Airtel and Telcom Kenya to ensure that data is affordable for the entire private sector, so that students, wherever they are not exposed to the commercial rates for data, so that they can be able to learn online where possible. Already, as you've heard from the Cabinet Secretary, that the medical students have already been recalled, the finalists are being recalled back into education institutions, both TVET and universities. So there are students who are already coming back into schools, into colleges and universities. And so far, so good. And this is the mode, perhaps, I hope that the ministry will take, where we will have phased reopening, so that we can all, in conjunction with the Ministry of Health, be able to have a moment to look at and see whether reopening will have an impact on the pandemic. Education is massive in Kenya. Basic education alone is 13 million children in total. TVET and university is another 6 million or so. It is massive. So moving that many students will definitely cause destabilization in the trajectory we are having with the pandemic. But fingers crossed, so far we've put in all the measures: water and hand washing. Masks are now embedded into the way now Kenyans think. So we, as education institutions, that is not our biggest worry for now, that we will not be able to implement masks. We know we will be. For public institutions, I know they have to worry about the financing of those masks, but on the larger scheme of things, this is the smaller thing. Water is the bigger thing. There are schools where perhaps water is a challenge, but so far we've worked with communities, MPs, to ensure that schools will have access to water. And so far, a lot on the ground is being done to ensure that schools, no matter where they are, something at least is in the plan by January to be done for water. Yes.
Right. In terms
water is the first line intervention that WHO and our Ministry of Health here recommends for battling the pandemic.
All right. There has been a question in terms of financing of some of these measures that are being put in place by the Ministry of Health, especially in the private institution. Some of education experts have lamented that it will be a huge toll for private institution to, of course, cater for some of these measures and still continue to survive in this harsh economic time. I don't know if you do hold the same opinion, and you think the government, of course, should jump in and help this particular sector.
We have already, since May, we've been talking with the government and the Ministry of Education and the rest of the government in that manner. We have presented to the ministry the intervention that we would like, and we ask the government to intercede on behalf of the private schools. This is in form of a loan, government concession, where the private sector would then borrow from that at concessionary rates, and we've already tabled the proposals. So what is clear here, and I keep underlining so that there's no misconception that the government is giving free money to the private sector. No, it is doing a COVID intervention the way it did for the tourism sector, the way it has done for the SME sector. We're asking for the same intervention, 7 billion that schools can borrow from to get ready for reopening. This is a time that something that is beyond all of us that has happened, and it has seen not just education, people in education, livelihoods destroyed. It is across the entire economy. We've seen lives destroyed by this pandemic. It couldn't be helped. But now, as a government, then we have to come together to ensure that we rescue as many jobs as possible across the entire economy. And in education in particular, there are 155,000 teachers and another 133,000 non-teaching staff, from librarians, office workers, cooks, cleaners, watchmen, drivers. These are jobs that are important to our economy. They help this country run. Mm-hmm. So as this is what we are telling the government. Let us work together to save some of these jobs so that Kenyans come January have a place that they can earn their livelihood from. At the moment, the situation is really, really desperate. We've got teachers and school owners even in some parts of this country doing kazi ya mtaa, doing anything to put some money and some food on their tables. So the government as a whole, they needs to come together and rescue all the jobs that seem to have been, that have been adversely affected by the pandemic. As an association, we have put together the frameworks for the rescue package and how the schools will then access this package once the government releases the money, and how they will repay this money back to government. Mm-hmm. We expect that the sooner the money is is disbursed, the better, so that we can be sure that as many teachers have their jobs, as many office workers have their jobs, as many accountants, as many drivers have their jobs when we reopen as is possible. Otherwise, the whole country will be teetering if we all don't come together and figure out how to get back to where we were in March as a country.
We have seen cases of BOM teachers demonstrating on the lamentation that they have not been paid, and you've talked about rescuing some of this career. And the question now will be, there has been a double speak in the Ministry of Education. For a moment, the Cabinet Secretary for Education, Judge Magoha, says the BOM teachers have been paid. And then again, we see them walking on the streets, demonstrating on the streets that they have not been paid. Perhaps what intervention should be put, not only to BOM teachers, but to private school teachers that have closed and they really depended on fees for them to be able to survive?
I believe for public schools, the issue was, I'm not the expert to talk on this, but from what I have understood, the matter was that there was something that needed to be done to capitation. These teachers are being paid from the money that the government pays for students. This year, the students have not been in school, so some of that money has now been allowed to go to schools and therefore be disbursed to teachers. So I believe it was just a cleaning up of the actual roster of BOM teachers per school. And once that has been done, I believe the capitation will be disbursed. Though at least that one is clear, they will be paid. And that's not in dispute at all. For the teachers in dispute, of course, and still where we really need to put our heads together and really need to make things happen very quickly, are those in private schools who have gone without pay from end of April. So for the government teachers, it is clear they are going to be paid. Because once the head teachers and the principals work clearly with the government to clean out who is a BOM teacher and what, then that money will is already been allowed to be used in that manner. So for the government sector, that has been sorted out, and it is going to happen. At least these are teachers who will now at least have incomes flowing in their hands.
All right. Now, Ms. Kasanga, as the chairperson of the National Kenya Private School Association, I'm sure you have had the reports that some of the private schools have closed down indefinitely. And therefore, the cry has been that in Kenya, the education system, as you mentioned earlier, is quite massive. And therefore, if some of the private schools are now, shifting from this particular sector, there will be a crisis in terms of how we get to ensure that all children get to learn. Has that been a concern, and have you raised it with the education stakeholders to ensure that, there are not really gaps once we decide to reopen and learn in the new normal?
Yes, already as a Kenya Private Schools Association, we've already started mapping out and clustering schools. These clusters will help absorb some of the students whose schools close so that they don't miss a place come January. At the end of the day, it is important to note that with the private sector, a parent chooses a school. So we can recommend another school. If that parent doesn't feel that that school is as good as the one they closed, that was closed, then that becomes another issue. But on the whole, we are ready to absorb all the students who have lost a place in a school because the school has shut down. We are still hopeful a lot of the schools will reopen. We have run into trouble, especially where schools were on leased buildings. But on the whole, we've managed to mitigate all issues, especially when it came to bank loans and things like that. We've negotiated with all the banks, and all the banks have agreed to not force schools to pay back during the period of the pandemic, and we urge any school that has not managed to talk to its bank on these matters to very quickly go to their bank. We have negotiated these frameworks with the banks, so the banks are ready to listen to any school owner who is feeling particularly pushed to the wall because of the lack of income. We have talked to the banks are ready to listen to school owners to ensure that it is not the loans that will make that school not reopen. It will be other factors. but on the financial side, and that has been done. We've also talked to the Landlords Association through the Kenya Private Sector Alliance, and we are working to make sure that no school is shut on that end. And we are urging any school owner out there who is still having problems with their landlord, please talk to us. We already have these frameworks with the Landlords Association in place to ensure that all schools are still there come January, when we expect to fully reopen the education sector.
Mm-hmm. Talking about January, the question now will be, as a third world country, the measures that we have put in place, do they signify that we are ready? Because, you know, some parts of the country might be ready, but we are talking about the 47 counties, including the marginalized counties. Do you think as a third world country, we are prepared in the next 3 months or so to be able to kickstart the education sector?
We are, as educationists, we are ready. The same applies to KPSA. We have schools in all 47 counties. We are actually more worried about schools in poor urban areas more than schools in rural areas where the penetration of the virus has been lower. Mm-hmm. So for us, the bigger worry is in the high density, poorer urban areas where we find class schools are smaller, bigger population, and we as the KPSA have already begun putting in structures for blended learning, which is a mix of online and physical class presence, to ensure that kids do not lose their right to access to education because of the Ministry of Health requirements on managing the pandemic. We recently launched a platform that will ensure that come January, we make sure that all students in our schools don't miss education because of especially social distancing. Or if they fall ill, they don't have to be away from school for 3 weeks, 4 weeks. Or if there happens to be a localized shutdown, because that's how we expect from now onwards things to move. If that eventuality comes, then schools, the students in those schools don't have to miss their right to education because of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm. All right. Now,
yes,
you have talked about the issue of, you know, e-learning, and some education experts and education officials have, of course, argued that private schools are quite, you know, have quite the infrastructure when it comes to e-learning. For them, it was quite quick to adapt. And therefore, there has been calls for a public-private partnership when it comes to e-learning. Should we have, God forbid, a second wave of infection? I don't know whether you have had meetings or conferences to ensure that, you know, public institutions are able to embrace this particular new way of learning. Because as it is, even as the government is using the KBC, the EduTV, we still have children in the poor areas and the marginalized areas that cannot be able to use this mode of education. Has that been a concern and an issue on the table that is quite being discussed about?
We have, there's been the digital learning program since 2013. And while it took a while to kick off, it is now in every school in this country. And every primary school, public primary school in this country is equipped with computers, with laptops, with tablets, and technically, if we should there be a second wave, I think it is the private sector that will struggle a little bit more to get online. But that said, like I said, we have at the Kenya Private Schools Association a national platform that allows teachers and students, irrespective of device, to continue to access e-learning and virtual learning, and for teachers to keep teaching. And I believe this is a discussion that the government, the Ministry of Education, will need to have internally to figure out how to scale up that the digital learning program, so that during this time of uncertainty with the pandemic, we do not fall back where we are right now, where interventions have not really worked. And I really have to praise KICD, that despite a lot of fight back, and we are focused a lot on the problems without providing for solutions. We've not really done the data of how many students actually accessed content via TV, via radio, via internet. We've not done that, KICD content. And therefore, we don't really have a scale of the problem of those who could not and why they could not. We're just assuming on the whole that children cannot access learning content. When you look at how, say, companies like Safaricom partnered with publishers to make content available, the data we are seeing from that is not quite supporting the notion that it is impossible for all these other interventions to work. So going forward, I would suggest that perhaps we need to look at the issue of alternative access to learning in a way that is not always saying, let's not do it, we are too poor to do it, and accept that the census, last year's census shows that there's this penetration of mobile devices with internet. Then we leverage on that and then work out who else can, who does not have internet, who does not have a radio, who does not have a TV. And then we come up with a solution for that. Yeah. Liberia and West Africa did exactly that. And what they have done during this pandemic, therefore, is that they only have about 2% of the population, of the school-going population, that had no access to learning. And that was an easier thing to sort out than us here, where we don't really have firm figures, yet we have the frameworks for doing this. If we had worked with the Ministry of Interior, with the Nyumba Kumi framework, by now we would have been knowing there's a child living in Kajiado, Isinya town, who does not have a TV, a radio, nor a mobile phone. Would have known what to do with that child. Safaricom, even, just neighbors would have come together and donated a radio or something to make sure that that one child, that those 10 children would have had access. But we didn't quite attack the issue of access to devices in that manner, perhaps because it was always hoped that the pandemic would come and go. And as it went on and on and on, now we are beginning to perhaps look back with the benefit of hindsight, which is always perfect, by the way. When you look back, what could have been is always perfect. But these are the lessons that we must take away from the pandemic, so that, as God forbidding, if a second wave does come, we are able to prepare for it in a solid manner. What I can say here very confidently, that KICD has done a fantastic job in communicating and in ensuring that its content is available at no cost to everybody. So this content was there. It was just what lacked perhaps was a coordination from the schools, teachers, schools, coordinating and reminding students when to read what and when to listen to what. And without that final bit of coordination, then we found students not being organized to be at the right place at the right time. To know if I'm in CBC grade 4, this is what I need to be listening to at this time because my teacher reminded us, that sort of thing. And this is perhaps where we have felt the absence of the Teacher Service Commission all those months. We've only had them when we were doing the community-based learning, which unfortunately was stopped by a court order.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much, Ms. Kasang. Of course, if you can give us your final remarks on what is happening in the country and what we should expect and what we should learn in this pandemic on this education sector.
As a parting shot, this month would have been third term. If schools were open, would have been getting very ready to learn for a very short term, and then the beginning of October, the would send away all the other students and be left with exam candidates. who then sit for their exam. So this is a year like no other. We have had delayed exams before because of various things. I can very quickly, off the top of my head, remember in 1991, exams were delayed because it had leaked, so they were delayed. In this case, we are having a worldwide emergency, and in a worldwide emergency, different solutions will need to be sought out. And I know all parents are very worried about their candidates. I am hopeful that as education stakeholders, we can come out of this quagmire where it looks like we have lost an academic year. I hope we can come out of it without injuring the students in any way. It is us adults who should be able to say next year, we are going to work double time to ensure that children catch up, not the children who should lose an entire year of their lives for something that is way beyond us. It is us adults who should be able to put our heads down and call upon our training as teachers and say, we can do this. We have done it before, we keep doing it. Children keep dropping off of school and coming back. We don't make them repeat. We put down our heads and we help them recover what they have lost. So this is perhaps my parting shot. I hope that as stakeholders, we can all come together and rescue these children from the specter of having to repeat a year because of something that has been beyond all of our controls. Let us look at what West Africa did. They had to close their education systems for up to 15 months because of Ebola. They did not make students repeat. No, they helped them recover lost time by condensing knowledge. Universities, we are experts at doing this. Students, whenever they go on riot, they get chased. When they come back, they do condensed. You don't repeat an academic year. So let us hope that we can get out of that corner of forcing children to repeat and us, the adults in education, putting in the hard work that is needed to ensure that our children don't carry for the rest of their lives the havoc that the pandemic has caused to education.
All right. Thank you so much, Ms. Mudheo Kasanga, for making time and giving us quite a perspective on what is happening and what should happen and what should be done.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure being here.
That has been Ms. Mudheo Kasanga, the current national chairperson of the Kenya Private School Association here in Kenya, of course, giving us an insight from what you've heard. And the main point being that even as the Ministry of Education is putting in place measures to help children during this time of pandemic, they should not be hurt in the process. We are taking a short break, but we'll be back in a moment. Do stay tuned.